We do not need international organizations like the so-called West African body, ECOWAS, to tell us what to do. West Africa's most powerful bloc is in crisis. And right now in Accra, ECOWAS leaders are racing against time to contain the fallout. They're planning something they think will save ECOWAS. But what are they really doing? Let's find out. When ECOWAS summoned an emergency meeting in Accra, it wasn't to defend the future of West Africa. It was to defend itself from collapse. For decades, the organization had presented itself as a symbol of African unity, promising economic prosperity, free movement, and democratic governance. Yet behind the polished speeches and grand summits, ECOWAS operated as little more than a political cartel, a clique of elites more concerned with protecting their foreign alliances and internal privileges than uplifting the people they claimed to represent. So when Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso turned their backs in January 2025, they didn't just leave a bureaucratic club. They shattered the illusion. ECOWAS had worn a mask for 50 years, and the Sahel nations ripped it off in one historic move. There were no prolonged negotiations, no last-minute compromises, no begging for re-entry. They exited, clean, bold, and immediately unveiled the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, a new structure born without ECOWAS oversight and, most importantly, without the shadow of Western puppeteering. It was a move ECOWAS couldn't predict, and definitely couldn't prevent. Inside Accra's gilded meeting halls, where officials once spoke with the arrogance of permanence, fear now stalked every conversation. Because the real crisis wasn't just 3 nations leaving. It was the dangerous realization that ECOWAS membership was not sacred, not eternal, and certainly not irreversible. As the emergency sessions began, ECOWAS ministers didn't focus on the needs of West African citizens. They didn't scramble to protect farmers whose goods might now rot behind hardened borders, or the migrant workers stranded between new political fault lines. Their first concern was selfish and logistical. What would happen to the programs, the missions, and the financial networks they had embedded across the Sahel? ECOWAS peacekeeping outposts, development banks, cross-border offices. All of it suddenly stranded inside countries that rejected their authority. Millions of dollars in contracts, diplomatic deals, and infrastructure projects turned to dust overnight. In a panic, the elite scrambled behind closed doors to protect their assets, their reputations, and their grip on power. But beneath that scramble was a deeper, darker fear. The rebellion might spread. In Guinea and Sierra Leone, even in the Gambia, people began to whisper louder. Ordinary citizens and bold outsiders asked the same dangerous question. If Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso could walk away, why can't we? Why stay loyal to an institution that answers more quickly to Washington, Paris, and Brussels than to the streets and farms of West Africa? The seasoned political class understood exactly what was happening. And they knew this was not about rescuing unity. This was about extinguishing rebellion before it set the whole region on fire. Behind the closed doors of Accra, they didn't draft plans for reconciliation. They plotted punishment. Financial sabotage, diplomatic isolation, economic strangulation. They knew they couldn't launch a military campaign against AES without triggering an international scandal. But they could weaponize trade, banking, and political leverage to make independence unbearable. Meanwhile, external powers watched hungrily. Russia, Turkey, and China moved silently, but decisively, offering Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso new partnerships that bypassed ECOWAS altogether. Unlike the Western powers, they didn't wrap their intentions in hollow lectures about democracy. They offered weapons, infrastructure, political support, and most importantly, they offered it without the colonial arrogance that had long poisoned ECOWAS' Western backers. In Washington and Paris, panic spread faster than in Abuja or Accra. It wasn't insurgency they feared. It was the loss of control over a region rich in gold, uranium oil, and untapped geopolitical power. Inside Accra, ECOWAS ministers clung desperately to the illusion of authority. Their press releases spoke of sovereignty, and regional dialogue. But every insider knew the truth. This wasn't diplomacy. It was survival. ECOWAS' credibility had already suffered a fatal blow. The people of West Africa, the traders, farmers, herders, and migrants, had seen through the polished lies. For years, they watched ECOWAS leaders fly first class to global summits, while roads back home crumbled into dust. They saw the bloc side with foreign banks and foreign armies, while poverty and injustice consumed their villages. Now, the silent majority understood die. ECOWAS was not created to serve them. It existed to rule them, and to sell them out when convenient. As the first chaotic day of meetings came to an end under the heavy Accra night, no staged handshake, no carefully worded communique, no photo op could hide the truth. This wasn't about policies anymore. This was about legitimacy, and ECOWAS had lost it. As the limousines pulled away from the conference center, leaving behind a fortress of broken promises, one brutal question echoed in the hearts of those still loyal to Africa's future. Was the death of ECOWAS not a tragedy, but the first true liberation West Africa has seen in decades? Let that question linger. Before we continue, know this. In Black Rebellion, we bring you only verified information through local journalists on the ground and authentic online sources. We bring you black untold stories that the Western metric wants to suppress. If we stay silent, the truth stays buried. But together, we can make sure it's never erased again. Like, subscribe, share to black communities. Now let's continue. To call the collapse of ECOWAS a tragedy is to completely misunderstand what ECOWAS had become. It was never a union of equals. It was never the shield of West African dignity. It was never the dream of true independence our ancestors fought and died for. ECOWAS, for all its ceremonies and hollow declarations, had long stopped serving the people. It became the velvet glove of neocolonialism, a bloc that served foreign powers first, regional elites second, and the ordinary African last. If at all, the unity it claimed to defend wasn't built on mutual respect. It was built on debt, negotiated in secret, on military interventions, greenlit from Paris and Washington, on rigged elections, framed as stability, and on endless agreements that enriched foreign companies while hollowing out local economies. So let's be clear. The death of ECOWAS is not a tragedy. It's a long overdue correction. It is the final unraveling of a decades-long lie, a false promise that kept West Africa shackled under the boot of foreign control and elite betrayal. For the first time in generations, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso showed us what real sovereignty looks like. They rejected the lie that Africa must forever orbit the political whims of Europe and America. They proved that true independence means making your own decisions, not begging for permission. It means forming partnerships from a place of power, not guilt. And it means choosing your allies based on your future, not your colonizers' past. And that is why the death of ECOWAS, as it was, must not be seen as a failure, but as a beginning. When the Sahel states walked away, they didn't just exit a crumbling bureaucracy. They cracked open the possibility that West Africa could rise again, not built around a rigid system of gatekeepers and foreign puppets, but rebuilt on the original principles it should have honored from the start. Solidarity, dignity, without compromise. Critics will scream about regional instability, about threats to democracy, about dangerous nationalism. But where were their tears when ECOWAS sat silent while foreign militaries planted bases across African soil, without the voice or consent of the African people? Where was the outrage when natural resources were stripped, sold, and siphoned away while villages fell deeper into poverty and despair? Let's be clear. The only instability the collapse of ECOWAS threatens is the instability of a system that kept West Africans chained to someone else's ambition. Liberation has never come without disruption, and if the death of ECOWAS unsettles stock markets in Paris or rattles old elites in Abuja and Accra, so be it. Because for the millions who were never invited to ECOWAS' polished roundtables, for the farmers, the migrants, the miners, and the youth, It is a breath of freedom long denied. This is the first undeniable signal that West Africa can be more than a pawn, more than a client state, more than a set of resource-rich lands auctioned off by corrupt middlemen in return for international applause. If West Africa dares to follow through, if it builds new alliances on African terms, demands new economic systems that serve African citizens first, and creates new security pacts that protect African lives rather than foreign investments, then the fall of ECOWAS won't be remembered as chaos. It will be remembered as the first true liberation since the end of colonial rule. The question is no longer whether ECOWAS can be saved. The question is whether West Africa can finally save itself, not from one another, but from the parasitic structures that wore the mask of protection while draining the continent dry. And for the first time in decades, the answer finally feels within reach. So now we ask again, can anything save ECOWAS? If ECOWAS leaders truly believe a last-minute emergency summit in Accra could wipe away 50 years of betrayal, they've fatally misread the pulse of the continent. The wounds they left behind aren't shallow. They are deep. They are infected. And they are remembered in every village, every market, every checkpoint where promises of unity turned into daily humiliation. And let's be honest, trust does not return with polished press releases or photo ops. It does not return with diplomatic smiles or vague words about brotherhood. It only returns with evidence of sacrifice, with proof of loyalty to the people, and ECOWAS has none to offer. The streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou know the truth that Accra still pretends to deny. ECOWAS was never built to empower West Africans. It was built to manage them, to preserve the illusion of independence, while the old colonial structures stayed intact beneath polished conference tables and staged ceremonies. When ECOWAS speaks of stability, it means obedience to the same foreign financial systems that bleed Africa dry. When it preaches unity, it means submission to regional strongmen selected not by the people, but by Washington, Paris, and Brussels. And when it talks of democracy, it means whichever regime will guarantee access to oil, gold, uranium, and shipping lanes, not the one chosen freely by the people themselves. No, the people remember. They remember everything. They remember how ECOWAS stood paralyzed, or worse, complicit, while foreign armies spread their military bases across African soil without a single vote, without a single voice, without a single ounce of consent. The people do not forget. They do not forget how ECOWAS imposed brutal sanctions on small, vulnerable nations, punishing millions with starvation and unemployment, while allowing multinational corporations to plunder resources through lopsided trade deals dressed up as partnerships. The Accra meeting is being dressed up in the usual lifeless rhetoric: respect for sovereignty, dialogue between brothers, future cooperation. But no one outside the hotel ballrooms believes it anymore. This so-called emergency session wasn't called to heal West Africa's divisions. It was called to preserve ECOWAS' survival. It was about protecting the wealth, the power, and the illusions of relevance clung to by a regional elite that long ago abandoned the dream of real Pan-Africanism. Every decision, every press release, every staged handshake reeking of forced smiles and desperate PR reveals not leadership, but fear, not principle, but panic. If ECOWAS truly wanted to win back trust, it would require a transformation so deep, so honest, that its very foundations would have to tremble. It would demand public admissions of failure, not vague acknowledgements of challenges. It would require the immediate dismantling of bureaucracies that prioritize IMF directives over the needs of African villages. It would mean unconditional severance from Western military dependence, closure of all foreign military bases, cancellation of predatory trade agreements, centering every policy around farmers, traders, teachers, and workers, not bankers and politicians. It would demand the creation of a sovereign regional banking system free from European control. It would demand investment in rural economies, not just gated capitals. It would demand transparent governance, not backroom deals signed in Swiss banks. It would require putting African dignity before Western praise, African unity before personal power, and African futures before GDP charts cooked up in New York and Paris. But let's be real. Nothing about the Accra meeting, or any meeting planned by the current ECOWAS structure, hints at such a revolution. Instead, every detail screams of a bloc scrambling to protect its image, not its people. A bloc trying to stall for time, just long enough to renegotiate foreign loans, secure new military contracts, and reposition itself in the eyes of foreign empires watching nervously as their grip begins to slip. The reality is brutal, but simple. Trust shattered on this scale is not rebuilt with words. It is rebuilt with blood, with sacrifice, with humility. And ECOWAS, trapped by its greed and arrogance, cannot pay that price. Not even close. Even if tomorrow it declared sweeping reforms, it would find no audience left to believe them. The damage is done. The Sahel states, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, have already proven that an African nation can survive beyond the suffocating grasp of ECOWAS. They've lit a fire of imagination that not even the most sophisticated propaganda machine can extinguish. Across the fields of Niger, across the deserts of Mali, across the highlands of Burkina Faso, the spirit of true sovereignty now blows like a fierce wind, and no summit in Accra can change its direction. Even the nations still trapped within ECOWAS, tied by dusty treaties and ceremonial diplomacy, feel the pull of something new. A future where West Africans choose their own path, not by the approval of foreign embassies or regional aristocrats, but by the voices of their own people. There is no political theater left that can mask the stench of betrayal. There is no carefully worded communique that can rewrite the lived memory of hunger, humiliation, and hopelessness, the very legacy ECOWAS presided over for decades. And there is no meeting, no matter how urgent, no matter how well publicized, that can erase the burning truth, now etched into the heart of the continent ECOWAS didn't fall. It collapsed under the weight of its own betrayal. The people of West Africa once trusted ECOWAS. They will not make that mistake again. The meeting halls of Accra may still echo with empty speeches, but the real future of West Africa has already moved on, and it no longer wears the face of ECOWAS. While the bloc's aging leaders clutch at outdated legal frameworks and beg for dialogue, the people, in the streets, in the fields, in the border towns, have already chosen a new flag to follow. And it's not the tired blue and white of ECOWAS. It's the bold spirit of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. A spirit forged not in foreign embassies, but in the blood and will of a new Africa rising. AES did not wait for permission. It didn't ask, negotiate, or beg for the right to exist. It was born out of necessity, out of betrayal, out of a hunger for real sovereignty that no ECOWAS communique could ever satisfy. Where ECOWAS demanded obedience to rules written by outsiders, AES demanded only loyalty to the land, to the people, to the right of Africans to govern themselves, without foreign chains. And in that single act of refusal, the refusal to kneel, AES seized something ECOWAS can never reclaim, the trust of a people who have waited too long for dignity. No matter what statements come out of Accra, no matter how many compromises are offered, no matter how often ECOWAS officials plead for regional unity, the truth is irreversible. AES has already replaced ECOWAS in the hearts of the people who matter most, the farmers, the soldiers, the teachers, the mothers, the youth. Not through propaganda, not through hollow promises, but through action. By standing up when it mattered most. By walking away from a broken house when others were still trapped inside. It does not matter if ECOWAS holds 20 more summits. It does not matter if Western diplomats flood the region with aid, packages to buy back lost loyalty. It does not matter if every screen in Lagos, Accra, and Dakar flashes with slogans about integration and cooperation. The break has already happened, not just politically, but spiritually. The people have now seen a different Africa, one not managed by aging elites, not dictated to by Paris or Washington, but shaped, finally, by African hands alone, and no Accra meeting can unsee what has been seen. AES is still young. It will make mistakes. It will struggle. But it carries something that ECOWAS extinguished long ago, a flame. The belief in African self-determination. The belief that sovereignty is not a slogan, but a reality worth fighting for. And because of that flame, AES will grow. It will not just survive, it will inspire. It will prove that independence is not some relic of the 1960s, but a living, breathing demand of every generation born under the shadow of broken promises. The funeral bells of ECOWAS are not ringing because 3 nations walked away. They are ringing because the very idea that Africans must forever ask permission to be free has finally been buried. In its place stands a new reality, born in the Sahel, spreading across the continent, carried by those who refuse to bow. So yes, ECOWAS can hold its meetings. It can sign its papers. It can parade its diplomats across every television screen. But in the streets, in the fields, in the beating hearts of the people, the future already belongs to something else. Something braver, something prouder, something truly African at last. Its name is AES. What do you think? Can ECOWAS ever make a comeback? And if so, what would it take to earn back the trust of West Africa? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, raw, honest, and unfiltered, subscribe to Black Rebellion and smash that bell icon so you never miss a drop. We're not here to repeat the same history. We're here to reveal the Black Rebellion, Black existence, and Black untold history they never wanted you to know. Thanks for watching. Until the next video, stay sharp, stay free.